Gophers. This is your government structure history lesson for all Americans. And I want you to listen up very carefully because your lives and fortunes could literally depend on you knowing this and knowing how it works. This is the structure of your government. Okay? So, let's begin. Right here, this big box. Come on in and take a look. This is the United States Unincorporated. Okay? This is the big kahuna. This is the Sovereign States Union. This is the Union States. Okay? Now, these are all nation states. What does that mean? Okay. When we're talking about the Union States, these are the states that we're talking about. Each one of these states has three components. Three primary components. Okay? There's the land and soil and the people. The people are the nation. The physical framework of land and soil comprises the state. Real states are physically defined. They have landmarks, they have rocks, they have water features, they have living people, animals, all the things that we think of when we think of our state. That's what we're talking about, okay? And that's what we're talking about here. These are the Union States, the United States, capital TH. See here? This is how it's spelled out in English. And this is an unincorporated government. All right? This box, this collection of Republican states, contains all the rest of the boxes. All right? So now we're going to talk about the next box. And this is the United States of America, Unincorporated Federation. All right? These states, the Union States, separated out certain powers. Although they began as sovereign and complete states with all powers in all jurisdictions of the law, they chose to insulate and protect their core Republican states by creating the United States of America Federation. All right? These states are international in nature. These are land and sea states, if you will. So this is what that looks like. Notice, you can still see the outlines of the states, but underneath, it's all the same color, right? Because it's all one contiguous international jurisdiction made up of the subsoil. Land is subsoil. This is soil jurisdiction. This is national jurisdiction. All right? Now here in the back row, we have three entities. Come take a look at this one. This is the States of America. It's also unincorporated, and it's a confederation. Now, what does that mean? Okay, here we have states, and here we have states of states. A state of state is a business organization that takes care of all of the routine duties of government, while the actual states are not in session conducting business. Okay? So these three are your American government. Want to take a quick look here? The United States Unincorporated, the United States of America Unincorporated Federation, and the States of America Unincorporated Confederation. All three of these American government structures were completed within the framework of the Revolutionary War. The United States was created by the Declaration of Independence. The United States of America was created by the July 4 Declaration of Independence. And the United States of America Confederation was created 5 years later, in 1781, under the Articles of Confederation. All right, so all these back row, the American government, was created during the Revolution. The United States was created in 1776 in July, as you all know. The United States of America Federation was created in 1776 in September of that year. And the States of America was created in May of 1781. Still, at the time, in 1781, the War of Independence, or the Revolution, was ongoing. So all three of these American government structures are coming straight out of the Revolutionary War. And they're yours. These three entities are your government, the American government. And all of them, you will notice, are unincorporated, and two of them are distinguished by the fact that in their names, the T is capitalized on the, indicating in English that they are the unique and only version. Okay? The is part of the name of the United States, and it is capitalized, which in English indicates that it is unique. This is it. This is the big kahuna. Same thing here, the Federation. The United States of America is unique. The T is capitalized. And finally, over here, you will see that the T is not capitalized. There's a reason for that. That's because these entities are business organizations. They are states of states. And in theory, there could be any number of them. All right? So, we're going to take the Federation. We're going to fit it inside the Union States, where it belongs. We're going to take the Confederation, and we're going to fit it inside of the Federation, where it belongs. And you can see that the American government, both in time and in space, is set up like a set of nesting boxes. Want to take a look at that? Okay, so here we have the Union States, the sovereign states in a union. Here we have the Federation, operating as the United States of America. And here we have the Confederation, formed in 1781 under the Articles of Confederation. And all those Confederate states are what? They are states of states. They are business organizations like the state of Ohio. All right? And they all fit inside the big box of the Union States that we all know and love. Now, let's take a look at these other three boxes. And as you can see, we have, again, what? The United States. But notice, see the name? The United States. The is not part of the name. The is an indefinite article. It does not indicate a singular, unique, one-of-a-kind entity. This entity, too, is unincorporated. This is the Federal Republic. It's the first part of your federal government, and it is an American subcontractor. It received the very first federal constitution in 1787 as a contract for services and a delegation of powers. Now, take that piece of information in and look at this next box. This is the United States of America, Incorporated. And it is what? It's the territorial government. And finally, over here, we have, again, the United States. Not a definite article, so it's not a unique entity, or not necessarily a unique entity. It too is incorporated, and it is the municipal government. Now, you may not realize this, but all three of these federal entities are a result of the treaties that ended the War of Independence. After the hostilities ended and everybody sat down at the peace table and made a peace treaty with each one of the entities that were engaged in the War of Independence, certain deals were cut. The end result, the implementation of the treaties, were the constitutions and the contracts for services and the power sharing that is expressed as part of the constitutional contracts. So you have the first federal constitution in 1787 with the United States, uppercase, uppercase, the federal entity known as the Federal Republic, and 2 years later you have the Constitution of the United States of America, 1789, with this British affiliated entity, and a year later in 1790 you have the United States, the municipal government. Now, all of these similar names can be very confusing, and a lot of these facts are not taught to you in school. You don't necessarily realize that there are three constitutions, or that there were three active constitutions at the time that this was all set up. But there were. The 1787 Constitution is called the Constitution for the United States of America. But there's something odd about it. United is used as an adjective in the name to describe the states of America. Okay? That is the contract between the Federation of States and the first federal contractor, the Federal Republic. Then you have the Constitution of the United States of America. And then finally, you have the Constitution of the United States, this municipal entity. Now, obviously, if you don't know the context of the conversation, it's easy to get these two mixed up. Just take a look. They're both called what? The United States. How can you tell the difference between the Federal Republic and the municipal government of Washington, D.C.? Unless you know the context, you don't know. And unless you know the difference between the two constitutions, you don't have that firmly in grasp either. If you don't know that there are two constitutions, one called the Constitution for the United States of America, with a small u on United, and another constitution called the Constitution of the United States, which was issued to the municipal government in 1790, it's completely easy to mix up and misunderstand which of these entities you're talking about. And a lot of the fraud that has gone on for the last 150 years is based on that exact mix-up. All right, so I trust that now that you've seen all 6 boxes and you know that there are 3 American entities and 3 federal entities, you can begin to separate this out in your mind. And when you know the American entities all stand under the Declaration of Independence, or rather one of each of 3 declarations of independence, and you know that the federal government and each one of these 3 entities stand under a constitution, it's easier for you to understand the demarcation between the actual American government and the federal government, which acts as a subcontractor for the American government. All right, let's go back here and take the American government back onto the table. I'm going to take these, put them together, and now you can see how these all fit, one inside the other, like nesting boxes. Okay, so here you have the real kahuna, the United States, unincorporated, the Union States. The members of the Union are all sovereign nation states. Next, you have the United States of America Federation, which is the international land and sea jurisdiction states. Next, you have the Confederation, and this is a business or a group of businesses acting as a confederation in the international and global commercial maritime jurisdiction. Okay, there's the 3 American government entities. And now we're going to add the federal entities. So we're going to add first the American Federal Republic. Then we're going to add the British Territorial affiliated government. And now we're going to add the municipal government of Washington, D.C. They all fit together like nested boxes. And they all are within the one big box of our American Union of sovereign states, the Union States. These states now I want to take our little props here, lay them out again, and observe some things to you. There's a relationship between the Confederation. Remember, the Confederate States are all business organizations that are doing business as states of states. These original American states of states were all characterized and set aside with the capital T on the definite article being made part of their names, so that they indicated a unique state. So we had the state of Ohio, the state of Massachusetts. These states that were the Confederation states, the business end of things, created the Federal Republic. They owned and operated the Federal Republic, which received the constitutional contract known as the Constitution for the United States of America. And now you can see why it was for the United States of America, right? The Confederation ran the Federal Republic, and they were both American entities. Now, there's a great deal of confusion about what happened in the Civil War. The Civil War, first of all, was not a war. It was what's known as a mercenary conflict. And the way the Civil War worked is that the Union states and the Federation states were not involved in it at all. The Union states and the Federation states simply wanted to do what other countries had done already and buy the freedom of the plantation slaves and settle their estate, their political status as free men, and do that at public expense. That's how they ended slavery in England, for example. And the Union states and the Federation states were in favor of that. They didn't want any bloodshed. They didn't want any arguments. They were willing to do that. They were willing to take on the expense of buying the freedom of all the slaves. And when it came time for all this other fusticuffs, they wanted nothing to do with it and didn't take part in the Civil War. So the American government, 2/3 of it anyway, said, hell no, we won't go. All right. The business entities, the so-called Confederate states, both North and South, decided to do something that resulted in a disaster that still has not been repaired or reconstructed to this day. What happened in the Civil War can only be explained in terms of affiliations. Okay, I want you to look at these two. The Confederation, operating as the States of America, and the Federal Republic, operating under the Constitution for the United States of America. Okay? And realize that the end result of the Civil War is going to be predicated by the start of the Civil War. At the beginning of the Civil War, both the Confederacy here and the Federal Republic were rendered inoperable. And why was that? Because the Confederate states that were members of this entity, the Confederation, broke up. The southern states of the Confederacy walked out. So there was no longer a quorum for the Confederation to operate. And if the Confederation couldn't operate, obviously their instrumentality, the Federal Republic, couldn't operate either. So at the beginning of the Civil War, 1860, both of these went away. They were both American, and they were both inoperable. So, as of 1860, the Confederation ceased to exist, broke apart, and the Federal Republic was inoperable too. A third of the American government disappeared. What we're left with is this. The United States, the unincorporated United States, the Union States, the Union of Sovereign States, and the Federation States operating on the land. And on the federal side of things, we have the United States of America, the Territorial government, which is British affiliated, and the United States municipal government that was run by the Holy Roman Empire. This is what we had left after the Civil War. Now, because the United States had chosen early on to insulate itself and to protect its soil jurisdiction, what we think of as the actual physical states we live in, it had only one outlet to conduct business left: the states of the Federation. Now, both the Union states that operate the national jurisdiction of the soil, the first 6 inches that we walk on and live our lives on every day, and the Federation states that represent the subsoil, this United States that's underneath this United States, right, became the only outlet for the American government to conduct business with other countries or between states, commercial, maritime, admiralty, anything. all ability to conduct business then devolved upon the United States of America Federation states. All of these states are known very simply as Wisconsin, Montana, Texas, Connecticut, Vermont, Maine, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Utah, Arkansas, Oklahoma. There's no the, there's no of, there's simply the name of the state. Now these, the federal entities, decided after the war that they would sponsor their own state-of-state organizations and move in on a quote-unquote emergency basis and replace our missing state-of-state organizations with theirs. So here's our American Confederation of States and their state-of-state entities, the state of Ohio, upper lowercase, with the word the definite article, included in the name and capitalized. And they were replaced by what? British Territorial states of states. These are the Tories at work again. I'm sorry. All right, guys, I have to have a moment of entertainment here. All right, so these states of states, which were set up and promoted by a federal subcontractor, took over and pulled a cuckoo bird maneuver to replace the actual Confederate states of states that were still inoperable because of the Civil War. And that's the situation we've had ever since, with both the British Territorial and Catholic, basically. Holy Roman Empire ended in 1829 or 1809, and ever since then it's been handled by various iterations of different Catholic administrations. So we had both of the federal contractors that were left basically trying to pick off bits and pieces of the delegated powers that rightfully belong to the Federal Republic and that rightfully belong to the Confederation of States, and often pretending to be or to represent these other entities that are American. So essentially we've had foreign governments in here pretending authorities and pretending to have roles that they were never granted. It's caused a lot of damage and a lot of confusion. So, I should also say, I'll put back all the pieces of the puzzle here. That the federal entities, these three guys, have their capital in Washington, D.C. And they were all supposed to be contained within the District of Columbia, except for the Federal Republic. Technically, the way this stacks out is again another nesting box situation. We're supposed to have the Federal Republic operated by the Confederation containing both the territorial government and the municipal government in a smaller nesting box situation. So if you think about it, what you've got is the American government and the federal government, three different entities in each group, and both of them set up like a set of nesting boxes, like Russian dolls. And they mirror each other. As a result, the American government, which still holds its seat of government in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the federal government, I said that wrong. The American government still holds its seat of government in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the federal government, which operates out of Washington, D.C., remain two separate entities, or rather two separate sets of entities. One American, one federal. One American capital and one federal capital. And people get this mixed up, understandably. So oftentimes, when you hear people say something like, oh, the Americans did this, or the Americans did that, what they're actually talking about is that the federal subcontractors did something. And our government had nothing to do with it at all. Now, I hope this has been instructive. I hope that you now have pictures on your screens and in your minds that show you the correct names. I hope that you will be able to keep it focused on how these things interrelate, focused on the fact that there's a complete American government set up during the Revolutionary War and a complete federal government that was set up to implement power sharing and trade agreements and other disbursements of power under the constitutions. Now, just so everybody has this all together, let's take a look here. You got the three American entities, the big boxes, the first three. And then you have the federal entities, the little boxes, over here, the last three. And I've been very careful to give you the exact way that these names appear with relation to the definite article. Hopefully, you'll be able to recognize one from the other depending on the time period and the context, because that's what you have to determine in order to know whether you are talking about, and let's do this one more time just to show people how confusing this is, the United States, Federal Republic, or the United States Municipal Government. The only way to tell if you're talking about the actual American Union of States is by this. Take a look. This one little definite article, the, capitalized, included as part of the name. The Federal Republic can only be recognized by the fact, number one, that the is not included as part of the name, and it's a small t, and the context. If it was between the years of 17, would have been 1795 and 1860, it could be either one. It could be the Federal Republic or the municipal government being referenced when you see the words or the name, the United States, with a small t. And if the action was taking place after 1860, except for a few kind of cleanup actions, when you see it spelled with a small t on the the is not included as part of the name. After 1860, and you see this, you're talking about the municipal government. Now this is a lot of information. I don't expect you to get it all in one bite, but I have done my best to show you how these two governments, the American government, of and for and by the people, and the federal government, a group of subcontractors, mirror each other. And how that mirroring creates confusion about which government is doing what and what you're actually talking about. This also applies to forms of law. And we'll have to talk about that on some other day. For now, try to get it firmly fixed in your heads what parts of this government are still operable, what we have to do to reconstruct the Confederation and the Federal Republic as American entities, and how the municipal government has been representing itself as the Union government, and how the British Territorial entity has been representing itself as the Federation of States. Come take a look again so you see this. Take a look here, first at this set, the United States Unincorporated, right? And then look down here. You've got the United States Incorporated municipal government. This is the theocracy of the municipality of Washington, D.C., operated as an international city-state. Okay, and over here, you've got the United States of America Federation of States, States of the Union, that is. And down here, under an almost identical name, you have the British Territorial government operating under an almost identical name. So, Americans, wise up. We've been the victims of a substitution scheme that is now 150, 160 some years old. And it's up to us to wake up and realize who we are and what we are owed, contractually and by a treaty and in all jurisdictions of the law. When we first realized that this is how things were actually set up, we were astonished. And we asked, why didn't anybody ever show us this? Why didn't we learn this in school? Well, the sad fact is that up until about 1965, we did. We did learn this in school. It wasn't presented in exactly this overt way, showing you how these things all fit together. But it was presented to us because we had a separate series of books, one for American history, the story of the American government, and U.S. history, which was the story of the federal government. Now, how is it and why is it that suddenly, after all these years, the American history books disappeared from our libraries and from our school libraries and from our school curriculum? Well, I think there can be only one likely explanation, and that is that the continued usurpation and misrepresentations of the federal government continued until the public servants were, in effect, offering to take over and usurp against their employers, depending on their employer's ignorance, to allow them to do this. I think there has been a concerted effort by the Federal Department of Education to limit the education of Americans and to promote the mistake of taking their mirrored federal government and mistaking that for our American government. I was one of those fortunate enough to have an education that included the American side of things. We had a book called American History, and we had a book called United States History, and they were very clearly labeled as two separate, related, but separate subjects. We also were given to understand that while the federal governments, or, because there are 3 different subcontractors, the federal governments all operate under constitutions and have contracts that they need to fulfill. The American government operates under the Declaration of Independence and is an independent national, international, and global government in its own right, without reference to the constitutions. The constitutions to the American government are contracts, and that's all. Anyway, folks, here you get the top-down look here. You have the Union and the Union States that contains the whole bailiwick. You have the Federation, not operable at the present time. You have the Federal Republic, which is American, and it's also not operable at the present time. You have the British Territorial government, and you have the municipal government of Washington, D.C. And as you can see, it all fits together like a set of nesting boxes. Hello, campers! For those of you who are just joining us, we're going to do a real brief reprise of what we covered last time. And that is basically the structure of our government, in sum total, both the American government and the U.S. government, which are two separate things. The American government consists of the unincorporated United States, the unincorporated entity known as the United States of America, a federation of states, and the Confederation, which was always run as the States of America. All right? All of these three American entities are unincorporated. If you think about it, the sovereign government has to be unincorporated. Okay? So, we have the United States, or if you want to do it the way they did in the 19th century, the United States. You have the United States of America, and you have the States of America. The Union, the original American Union of States, was of course formed July 4, 1776. In September of that year, the Federation of States was formed. So both the United States and the United States of America were formed in 1776. The United States in July of that year, the Federation of States in September of that year, and 5 years later, the Confederation of States. So it's 1776, 1776, 1781. All right? That's the American government. And they stack inside each other just like this, like stacking boxes. Then we have the federal government. The federal government are subcontractors of these guys. But we're more familiar with the federal government today than with these, because the states operating these entities have been out of session for a long time. They have come back into session since 2019. All right? So now, briefly, the federal government that we're all familiar with, or that we would normally be familiar with. This is the federal republic everybody's talking about. But it's important to understand that the federal republic was operated by the Confederation of States, the third part of the American government, and both of these entities went away during the Civil War. And that leaves us with these two entities. And as you can see, this is the territorial government, and this is the municipal government. They go by the very similar names of the United States of America and the United States. But when you look closer, you realize that the American version includes the word "the" as part of the name. Here again, "the" is included as part of the name of the American United States. So today, we're going to talk about jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is one of those things that people constantly have problems with. So it's one of the very first things I want to address in this video series. We have these jurisdictions that we work with all the time in law and in legal matters. Law is distinct from legal. And I really recommend that everybody go look up the two words law and legal in a law dictionary. That will help you to understand the two different systems that we are working with. Now, take a look here. We have the air jurisdiction. You'll notice that the air jurisdiction kind of flows above everything else that's going on. The air jurisdiction is global by nature. As you can observe in nature, air just circulates around wherever it will go throughout the entire globe. Then we have the surface. Okay, the surface of the earth is either covered by the soil or by the sea or some form of water, right? Okay, so you have the soil and the maritime jurisdiction. Underlying everything is the land. And as you can see in this little chart, the land even underlies the high seas and maritime jurisdictions, as well as the air. The land, which is the subsoil throughout the earth, underlies all these other jurisdictions. If you don't have the land as the foundation, you don't have any other jurisdiction. And that's why the land is so supremely important. Anyway, you can see here that the soil is the top sector, the top section of the land. And in British, or I should say English land law, the soil is defined as the top 6 inches of the land. So the soil is a relatively shallow little skin of the land which belongs to each nation. The subsoil, the land underneath the soil, goes all the way to the center of the earth. Okay? The maritime jurisdiction similarly has a skin of 1 inch of air above it. And it is the surface of the sea where ships ply and trade, and we have sea lanes, and we have commerce going on and trade going on in the jurisdiction of the sea. And beyond that, we have the high seas, and we have admiralty law, which takes over and then becomes the definitive form of law on the high seas. All these work together, more or less, as this little chart shows you. Now, the different forms of law in the jurisdiction of the air include canon law, ecclesiastical law, ecumenical law, all those sorts of things, as well as law that deals with things like patents, ownership of copyrights, and things of that nature. They can exist in the jurisdiction of the air. Then you have the soil, which is the national jurisdiction of every country, and the maritime, which is basically commercial or contract law. And then you have land law. The constitutions are land law. And that's just an example of all the different kinds of things that can be in the land law, but the constitutions are, interestingly enough, literally the law of the land, and so are treaties in general. And here down in Admiralty, we have Admiralty law. There you have the Uniform Code of Military Justice on the land side of this, and you have the true laws of Admiralty that take over on the sea. So I want everybody to take a good look at this and try to envision how these different jurisdictions all fit together and how these different kinds of law must interact with each other, and the sorts of determinations that have to be made to decide, well, is that an air issue or is that a soil issue? Is it a subject matter that belongs to the sea? Is it a matter of contract? Is it a matter of treaty? Each one of these different jurisdictions have their own forms of law that pertain. And so one of the great difficulties that we have when we are prosecuting something at law or prosecuting it legally is, what's the subject matter and where is it happening? Where is the action happening? What kind of law actually pertains to it? And that's part of what we'll be talking about, among other things, in this entire series. Thank you.